Hey everyone, Venruki here. I just wanted to quickly go over some changes that came out yesterday. I just woke up first thing in the morning and I'm recording this video. So I wanted to get out my kind of initial thoughts on what's going on. A lot of people who watch this channel are mages, and fire mages ended up getting nerfed, and just overall how I think these changes are going to go down, because I'm really happy to see them, to be honest. It's been, we've been waiting a little while since the AWC finished, and even maybe before the AWC, but I think these types of changes are the exact thing we want to see going forward. So, and also I've never really seen, just like looking at Twitter and stuff like that, I've never really seen the PvP community kind of so excited about every single change that went forward. It seems like the overall consensus is that these type of changes are kind of exactly what we want. So without further ado, we can kind of go through them really quickly. So for the first change we have is a change to pets. So players now deal 20% less damage to Death Knights, Hunters, and Warlock pets. There's a big problem. We even saw it in the AWC, and when you queue ladder, that Hunters have a really difficult time keeping their pets alive. And when they do die, it's really difficult to actually get a res off on them. A lot of the time, Warlocks don't even play with their pet because they're so squishy. I don't know if it's a huge issue for Death Knights, but I haven't heard it being a huge issue for Death Knights, but I can imagine that it is as well. This is the only change that I'm not exactly sure how will play out. So players now deal 20% less damage to Warlock, Hunter, and Death Knight pets. That being said, I feel like they might need a little bit more help. I mean, we could see how this one goes, but I think the big issue is that it's just so difficult to res your pet once it dies. So maybe, a bit shorter on the res cast would probably go a long way into helping those classes and their pets, but certainly a welcome change for them. Now, the next change, this is something that I'm happy to see. In 2v2 arenas, dampening will begin at 20%. It should say, once again, when both teams have a healer and a tank or healer. Now, this is actually different than how it was in Battle for Azeroth. In Battle for Azeroth, it was dampening will begin at 20% when if one team has a healer and the other team is double DPS, dampening is at 20%. So they took that away. So the healer DPS should be able to heal more through the double DPS teams. That's the only change. Other than that, this is a great change just because I feel like when they put dampening back to 0, when Shadowlands was just kicking off, it actually really hurt twos, in my opinion. I no longer wanted to queue with a healer because I felt like there was this downtime in 2v2 games when you're queuing with a healer where the first 3-4 minutes of the game, they didn't really matter that much until you get to this 20% dampening mark. I feel like that is kind of the sweet spot in twos, where it feels like you're instantly starting to get pressure and pressuring the mana, the healer's mana and stuff like that. So I personally am really happy to see this. It's going to make me a lot more excited to actually queue with a healer in twos. And yeah, I think overall it's a great change. One moment. All right. Next up, we have Druid, Convoke the Spirits, no longer cast Full Moon and Feral Frenzy when engaged in combats with enemy players. Now, I think this is a great change. When a Druid would use Convoke the Spirits and they'd get lucky, kind of roll the dice and it went their way and a full moon hit you over the head for 15,000 instantaneously. It was situations like that where, on the one hand, Druids would say, oh, we'll just interrupt Convoke and then it nullifies it. Well, that is true unless you get really lucky, because you can hit Convoke and immediately just drop a full moon on someone's head, Star Surge them after, and just kill them instantaneously. And I think it was a little bit too random. So I think removing Full Moon from Convoke the Spirits and Feral Frenzy, I think this is a great change. It removes kind of that random damage spike and is just going to make the spell a little bit more consistent going forward. And next up, we have the Mage changes. Now, there's two changes here, okay? So the first one we'll talk about is Infernal Cascade. So Infernal Cascade is this really, really crazy, let me scroll up a bit. Infernal Cascade is this really, really crazy conduit fire mages have where during your combustion, if you fire blast, it gives you additional damage, stacking twice. So when you, Meteor, Combustion, Fire Blast, Fire Blast, you're getting this huge spike of damage on that meteor, as well as your next Power Blast, and for the remainder of your combustion. It was upwards of 25% damage if you had the conduit. So that's a lot, and that's only going to go up as the expansion moves forward. So I think kind of nipping this one in the bud, so to speak, early on is a really good decision. Is this going to be enough on combustion damage? Not sure, but I think it's certainly a good place to start. I mean, if you think about 25% bonus damage, 33% reduction in that, you're looking at around 7-8% damage reduction during combustion. And maybe that might not seem like a lot. It definitely starts adding up because there is counterplay to combustion, and it might still be too strong. I think if there is anything to look at next, it would be Rune of Power. With Rune of Power instantly dropping when you use combustion, I feel like that's probably the next natural thing to look at if combustion is still too good, but I don't necessarily know if it will be. So I think these small changes in the classes at the top, you bring them down a little bit, and then we'll talk about also the classes at the bottom. You kind of want to bring them up a little bit, but we'll see how that one goes. But in terms of damage, I feel like this is more than a fair nerf. About, like I said, 7-8% damage reduction on your combustion. It's definitely going to matter. Now, Mage, Triune Ward got nerfed as well. Now, this is really bizarre because I could have sworn that Triune Ward was already nerfed, but I went and double-checked and triple-checked, and it wasn't. I thought from the beta, Triune Ward actually had a PvP nerf on it. So outside of PvP, the shields from Triune Ward were 65% effectiveness. And when I say 65% effectiveness, I'm saying if you took Blazing Barrier without Triune Ward, that's 100% effectiveness. Just a regular shield, 100% effectiveness. Triune Ward gives you all three shields, but 65% as effective as that one shield. So it's still incredibly good. And now nerfing that down, which I already thought it was nerfed, but apparently it wasn't. So that's why I think Triune was so crazy good, is it didn't actually have any PvP multiplier on it yet. And even I have like some fake patch notes that I wrote up that actually I'll show you the fake patch notes really quick that I wrote up that I kind of wanted for mages. Right here. So I said, these are the type of patch notes I'd love to see. Example, a slight buff to Fireball, Rune of Poggers nerfed, Infernal Cascade nerfed, which is actually, they did nerf Infernal Cascade and they did nerf Triune. But as you can see, I thought it was at 50% and I thought it should go down to maybe 40% if 50% wasn't too much, or it wasn't enough. Yeah, they ended up just bringing it down to 50%. And I think this is a great start as well. Honestly, as a mage, I feel like Triune Ward is a little bit... It's going to sound silly, but it feels a little bit necessary. Like playing a mage without Triune is pretty rough. Having no dispel protection for your combustion, having no dispel protection for your shield either. You know what I mean? Like you put up your Blazing Barrier and a Shadow Priest can dispel it, 1 global. Elemental Shaman can dispel it, 1 global. It's rough having no dispel protection. I feel like that's kind of the nice void Triune Ward fills. I feel like I can finally... obviously it's too strong at 65%. I 100% agree with that. But having a shield and having dispel protection where you don't just feel like you're a wet noodle versus everything, who's just able to dispel off your Blazing Barrier, it's really, really nice. And I think this is a great compromise. I think these mage changes so far are exactly what you want to see, right? When a class is performing a little bit too high, like Fire Mage was, nerf their defense a little bit, nerf their burst a little bit, and now we reevaluate, see where we're at. Because when you nerf, there's lots of ramifications that happen. Like mage nerfs, and we'll talk about the Holy Paladin nerfs as well. While they're not great, they might be able to shift the meta just a little bit, and that can completely change the game. So we'll see how it does play out. So in terms of mages, I feel like mages are they're going to be completely fine. I would love to see, maybe in a little arcane buff, a little frost mage buff, a little rework. But for now, with what I see for fire mages, I'm not freaking out that mage is going to be just destroyed. But I also recognize that mages did need some nerfs, and I'm happy that this is kind of where they started. So we're fine. And I also, if you're wondering, I still think Triune Ward is going to be the best legendary by far. So if you made Triune Ward, do not be sad, because I think it's going to be mandatory, basically. I don't know when I would stop using Triune Ward. Like Triune Ward would have to be like less than a shield for me to not want to use it, honestly. If this said, I would probably still use Triune Ward if it said like 40% effectiveness, 35% effectiveness. I hope it doesn't get there, but I would probably still use it just for the dispel protection and all the effects from the shields. Really, really strong. All right. Anyways, there goes. That's my rant on mages. So paladins. We have holy paladins here. Divine Favor Honor talent. The cooldown is increased to 30 seconds. So this is when Divine Favor is basically, it's a cooldown for paladins. We call it Aura Mastery. I guess I don't call it Aura Mastery because Aura Mastery is a different thing, but basically it makes them immune to interrupts and also increases their cast speed. So they got 60% haste before. It was a 25-second cooldown. They'd get 60% haste so that they could use their Divine Favor, cast a Holy Light, cast a Flash of Light, be unable to be interrupted. And that's the thing, if you're a mage player, you're always trying to like spell steal and counterspell or purge and, interrupt. And this Divine Favor kind of cushioned paladins a little bit. I'm interested to see how this one does play out because what they did to it is they increased the cooldown by 5 seconds. So instead of a 25-second cooldown, it's a 30-second cooldown. And it also, the cast speed was reduced from 60% to 30%. So that's a hefty nerf. And that means that the counterplay options of, like I said, using Spell Steal and purging it off, using Spell Steal, purging it off and interrupting, or using Purge and using Wind Shear, or, whatever it may be, it's going to be a lot easier to kind of wreck a paladin on his Divine Favor. And, yeah, I guess that's going to be something that they now have to deal with. Divine Favor was one of those things that it was a nice cushion for them, when they didn't have, Word of Glory healing, or they didn't have Divine Toll, being able to just constantly use their Divine Favor to top people off as well. Really, really effective. And we'll see if it's enough. I feel like this is I would say it's kind of a minor nerf, but in certain matchups, it might end up being really, really annoying for the Holy Paladin to deal with this change, but it's not over the top, right? It's 5 seconds, slight reduction in cast speed. Let's see how it plays out, and let's see how they do. Now, the next thing we have is Protection and Retribution Paladin changes. Word of Glory healing has been reduced by 20% in PvP situations. I feel like this is reasonable. Word of Glory heals for it heals for a lot. It's a lot of healing. In general. Now, I've spoken to like Vanguards about this, and he thinks that there may have been some other things that were buffing up the Word of Glory healing that weren't necessarily just the base spell, but they opted to just go with the base spell reduction in PvP, and yeah, I think it's reasonable, and we'll see how it plays out. I for one, I don't want any class to just be gutted, including Retribution Paladins. A lot of people don't like when Rets are good, but I'm of the opinion that every class should kind of feel strong and viable, every spec, except tanks. That's where I draw the line. But yeah, now, so these changes, great place to start, and they said, as always, we'll post updates if we make changes to the changes, and final adjustments will appear in the hotfix updates as soon as they go live. So my question is, where do we go from here? Are we going to see any other changes? Because I am surprised to not see, a few minor tweaks to some other specs. I think that's the only thing I would like to see. I think the changes we see so far, I'm like, okay, you know what? These are great. You love to see it. I think it's going to be a positive change overall, but I would also like to see, some of those, how we talked about Fire Mage just being brought down a little bit, Convoke being brought down a little bit, Holy Paladins being brought down a little bit. Now this is where we want to see like Mistweavers being brought up, maybe, a little, in my non-biased view, a little Frost Mage buffs, a little Fury Warrior buffs, you know what I mean? A little Unholy Death Knight buffs to kind of prop up those specs that are really not represented at all right now. Because I don't think these changes are going to be enough to make Mistweavers viable. Like, I don't think Mistweavers are going to be viable all of a sudden. So you really want to see them get some love. And then, of course, there's some other specs, like I guess Retribution Paladins losing some healing. They're still going to be absolute monsters when it comes to like one-shotting you. So we'll see how that does play out. Warriors, I feel like could maybe use a little change on their Intervene. Windwalker monks I think Weapons of Order, or just something to do with their cooldowns. It just, with Windwalker Monks, I really like the way their damage plays out, but I just think there's one cooldown. There's just one cooldown that like puts it over the edge. You know, you have Zuen, you have this Bloodlust from Zuen if you're using the Legendary, you have Storm, Earth, and Fire with Coordinated Assault, you have your, you know, if you're using an unused trinket, if you have Weapons of Order, it's just, it's all these things piling up that gives you so much burst damage. And I think like, if it was up to me, I would probably just change Weapons of Order a little bit, but yeah, anyways, without getting into details, I feel like I'm really happy with these changes. The twos change is great. The pet change, I think, might need a little bit more to help out hunters, warlock pets, and Death Knight pets, but overall, super stoked. I'm curious to see what you guys think about these changes. Are you happy with them? Are you worried about, you know, your class getting nerfed? Because I don't think you should be. I feel like when you see changes like this is the kind of thing where you don't feel like your class is going to be completely gutted, and that's not what nobody wants, you know what I mean? You know, Stoops made a video about small frequent changes, and if we saw these type of changes consistently, you know, on bringing down some of those really, really crazy specs, but not too much, and then also helping out some of the, you know, the less fortunate specs, I think that would be absolutely great. But yeah, I'm super excited, and I think for mages, we're going to be fine. These are definitely not too bad, but definitely needed a little bit of a reduction in our power, and I'm just overall really, really happy to see it. But I'd love to know your thoughts, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.